Good afternoon. I'm John Matea, president of the Goldwater Scholarship Foundation. On behalf of the foundation and Scholarship America, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this event. Today's webinar features Goldwater scholars who have pursued non-academic research careers. We are delighted to be able to have these scholars share their career experiences with you. About 9 months ago, I began working with three 2018 Goldwater scholars to build a Goldwater community. With this community, Goldwater awardees will be able to help Goldwater awardees throughout their careers. Today's webinar was organized by Matt Schoenbauer, Aaron Sandoval, and Daniel Morrow, the three Goldwater scholars who helped start the community. Matt will be introducing our speakers, Aaron will be asking our speakers your questions, and Daniel will be closing the webinar and letting you know how to continue the conversation with our panelists on our communication platform, Slack. Let me first introduce Linda Zulsdorf and Laura Mickle from Scholarship America, who will tell you how you can best participate in today's webinar. Thank you for taking time to participate in today's webinar. Please enjoy.
Hi, this is the Scholarship America team. I'm Linda Zulsdorf, lead program manager, and I'm joined by Laura Mickle, who co-manages the program. Thank you for joining the webinar today. As John mentioned, we will be here monitoring the chat function and selecting questions for the panelists to answer. Please submit your questions to us using the questions box on your screen. Later in the webinar, Aaron will ask the panelists a few of your questions. We are also here for your support. If you have any questions regarding GoToWebinar, please contact us via the chat function and we will try our best to assist you. Enjoy the webinar.
Hello, everybody. My name is Matthew Schoenbauer. I'm a 2018 Goldwater Scholar from the University of Notre Dame. Before we begin, I want to take a minute to introduce our speakers. We've got 5 really incredible people prepared to talk to all of you today, and for the sake of brevity, I'll give descriptions of them that do not do their accomplishments justice. Our first speaker is Dr. Allison Bishop, a 2005 scholar in mathematics. Dr. Bishop received a master's degree in mathematics from Cambridge University, where she was a Marshall Scholar, and then received her PhD in computer science from the University of Texas at Austin. She was featured as a Forbes 30 Under 30 in science in 2014 and was an assistant professor of computer science at Columbia University until co-founding Proof Trading, where she currently serves as president. Our next speaker is Dr. Susanna Leahy, a 2007 scholar in biology. She completed her PhD at James Cook University in marine biology and currently works as a fisheries scientist with Queensland Government in Australia. Her research specialties there include ecology, statistics, spatial analysis, and remote sensing. Next, we have Dr. Paul Johns, a 2006 chemistry scholar. Paul is calling in from his Naval Research Lab, where video recording is not allowed. For this reason, we won't be able to see Paul today. Paul got a PhD in physical chemistry from the University of Notre Dame and is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory. In his research, he focuses on ultra-fast spectroscopy and nanomaterials. Next, we have Dr. Thomas Markovich, a 2000 scholar in physics and math. He got his PhD in chemical physics from Harvard University, where he focused on modeling of correlated harmonic bath models and the treatment of long-range van der Waals interactions. Thomas is now an AI researcher at Forge AI. And finally, we have Matthew Reichel, a 2010 scholar in physics. He got his PhD in physics from Cornell, where he focused on computational physics and condensed matter theory. He now works as a quantitative associate at Wells Fargo. All right, now I'll give each of the panelists a chance to give a description of their path to an alternative career. Dr. Bishop, go ahead.
Thank you, Matt. It's nice to be here. As the first person, I also feel it's incumbent on me to say that in the rest of industry, we just call these careers, so rather than alternative careers. But I did start off in academia wanting to be an academic. I originally wanted to be a writer, and I thought I would probably be an English professor and novelist. But in starting my undergrad degree, I refused to take any more calculus because I was totally bored with it and wanted to take a more interesting class to fulfill my mathematics requirement, and ended up sort of falling in love with number theory and going into sort of pure mathematics for my master's, and then sort of switching from that to cryptography and data security, which sort of led me into computer science. Along the way, though, I started having a sort of existential crisis about what is sort of all of this research for, because I loved doing the sort of pure math puzzle kind of work and learning advanced and beautiful mathematics. But at the end of the day, I wanted to apply it to things that actually touched the lives of people. And cryptography seemed like an interesting route for doing that. So I tried to sort of find those areas in industry that were applying advanced mathematics, and that and what I found, though, was that the mathematics part wasn't the typical bottleneck for people's actual experiences with security technology, and started looking for, as an engineer, working on what would be the pieces of the problem that are the bottlenecks that are more impactful, and sort of happened to go into stock trading as a result, because someone was explaining to me this problem that they were facing in design of a stock trading platform that needed some more sort of mathematical reasoning about what's going on with high frequency trading and how do we protect investors from the kinds of predatory practices that are happening. And so I went to work for a stock exchange called IEX, and then a few months ago, my boss and I there left to found our own trading company, Proof. So I've sort of wandered all the way from the pure academic world to working for an established company to starting my own company, and everything in between, and sort of everywhere along the way kind of guided by the question of where can I be the most impactful, and sort of where can I apply interesting mathematics in a way that touches people's lives.
Great. Then Dr. Leahy.
Hi there. So it just says on there that I finished my, that I'm a 2007 Goldwater Scholar, which makes me realize quite how old I am now. I finished a Bachelor of Science in Biology at George Washington University in 2009 and moved to Australia for a year-long fellowship. It's been 10 years and I'm still over here. It's actually quite early in the morning over here, so you might get to see the sunrise behind me over the next few minutes. So I stayed for 10 years. I worked, I did a master's, I worked some more, I did a PhD, I did a postdoc, and then I left academia and worked in an NGO, a couple of different government departments, and now I'm a government scientist. And one of the things that I've learned along that way is that you're not a failure for leaving academia, and that was something that was, it took me a long time to get my head around. You're not a failure for leaving academia. I'm not a failure for leaving academia, because there's a reality of a limited number of academic positions available, and then a very large number of very highly qualified people. And something's got to give. We're not all going to get those positions. And it's hard to think about leaving academia when you're doing your PhD, and our supervisors are in academia. All of our role models are academics. So there's this added challenge that they can't necessarily help along the pathways that you're interested in because they don't have experience in that space, or they don't have the networks to help you get started in that space the way they would if you'd stayed in the university system. And of course, there's this guilt and pressure to follow in their steps and feeling like a bit of a failure that you can't keep up and that sort of thing. So that's something that I actually really struggled with in my steps away from an academic position. But there are actually some very good reasons to leave, and I have to remind myself of that every now and again. And one of them is the work-life balance that I see my peers who have gone into early career academic pathways. Their work-life balance is awful. There's this intense pressure to publish. There's this obsession with grant writing and these short funding cycles, and you have to structure your life around those short funding cycles. They have these short-term projects, maybe 2 to 3 years if they're lucky, and then they're expected to just pick up and move, across the world for the next prestigious position. And that comes at a huge personal sacrifice. Think about what their partners have to give up, their kids packing up, and any other responsibilities they have to family members. So if you are willing to say, well, that's not a path for me, there's a huge number of job opportunities outside academia. As Dr. Bishop mentioned, they're just called careers. And so the degree that you're getting now and the experience you're getting now are actually very highly sought after in those careers, which brings me to my next point, which is that you should see your PhD as a big chunk of experience on your CV, which is what employers are looking for, and an excellent opportunity to grow your skill set. So even in the course of a normal PhD where you're not even thinking about leaving academia, you're already demonstrating abilities that all sorts of employers want. You're demonstrating an ability to design a project, to lead it, to complete it to a very high standard. There's all sorts of academic skills that I found useful outside academia. The ability to know how to run experimental design properly, to carry out literature reviews, track funding, to do the nitty-gritty of experimental procedures that are in your field, but also the ability to learn nitty-gritty experimental procedures potentially in other fields. Data analysis, obviously extremely important. And then just being able to write a manuscript, deliver talks to your peers, those are all the sorts of things that employers are very interested in, no matter where you go. And during the years that you're in a PhD, you also have this golden opportunity to branch out or upskill. One of the things that I did and that I highly recommend is branching out in fields like communication. So learning how to deliver talks to people who are outside academia, whether that means going into high schools and high school education programs, or meeting with project stakeholders that you might otherwise never get to meet. In my case, that was meeting with subsistence fishermen in the Philippines. I met with indigenous rangers in the Torres Strait, and I was speaking with these people and learning how to communicate very complex science to people with no scientific training. And that was a very good learning experience for me. And it's a skill I maintain to this day. Also, writing for non-academic audiences. These days, there's all sorts of science-themed non-science outlets, magazines and blogs, The Conversation, things like that. For me, that was having to write blurbs for traditional owners of land on which I was working and sea country that I was working on. And these people had no formal scientific training, potentially no higher level education at all. And just being able to communicate your ideas outside of normal scientific audiences is a skill that you need to practice if you're interested in leaving those academic environments. Your PhD years are also a great time to learn technical skills outside of your core discipline. So I did a PhD in marine biology, but I was quite interested in remote sensing and spatial analysis. So I actually ended up incorporating some of that into my PhD and pursuing further training in remote sensing using satellites and drones, spatial analysis, and then that leads to advanced statistical analysis and big data skills. So while I graduated with a degree in marine biology, as did many of my peers, we actually walked away with extremely different skill sets, which made us very employable to very different types of employers. So thank you very much for your time today. I hope some of these lessons prove useful to you.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Johns?
Hi. Again, because of Department of Defense regulations, can't be with you via video, but I'm happy to be here to be able to talk with you a little bit about my path. So I was a 2006 Goldwater Scholar and ended up graduating from Notre Dame in 2017 with my PhD. And I spent a lot of my time in graduate school thinking that an academic position is what I wanted to do. Primarily, I wanted to teach, but also to do research as well. I just found it rewarding to be able to kind of develop students and help them to accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish. So when it came time to look for a job, I was applying for some assistant professor positions and looking at various postdocs and other positions to see what was available. And really what I found out, perhaps a little later than I should have, was that these academic positions are really difficult to get. And at least in chemistry, it's something like 20% of PhDs can even have that opportunity. And it doesn't really matter necessarily that you have great qualifications. Sometimes it's just kind of a luck of the draw as to whether you get one of these positions or not. And then I started to explore other possibilities. So what else could I do? And really started to dig down, why was it that I liked teaching? Is it because I like teaching itself? or what were some of my underlying motivations. And really what I came to find was that what motivated me in a career path is to be doing something that makes a concrete difference in the world, that helps people in some capacity. And I think I found that that to be the case here at the Naval Research Lab, that I'm able to use my skills to help people in a concrete way. For me, it was kind of a natural fit to come here. My research was in nanomaterials, using ultra-fast spectroscopy to study gold nanomaterials at the picosecond timescale, and do some modeling on the computer of these systems. And I happened to run across an ad for a postdoctoral position at the Naval Research Lab, where they were looking for an ultra-fast spectroscopist who focused on gold nanostructures and did computational modeling of the same system. So I really kind of lucked out in that regard. But I found that I can do a lot of important research, a lot of research that helps people, that can help the Navy. And I mean, what I've really found out is that there are smart people who work in all kinds of places. And certainly here at the Naval Research Lab, there are plenty of people with doctorates who work here that do really cool advanced research. And while it is a postdoc position, it's a little different from an academic postdoc in that it's really an entryway into a full-time federal employee position with the lab. So if later on down the line you're thinking postdoc, and a government postdoc can lead to a full-time job, unlike in academia. And yeah, so I just want to kind of encourage you to, while you're in graduate school, not only to think about academia, but think also about other options of what is it that really motivates you and excites you, and maybe even pursue a hobby that could end up developing some important skills as well. So just thank you for having me here, and I look forward to the question time in a few minutes.
Thank you very much. Dr. Markovich?
Hi, it's a pleasure to be here. So I finished my PhD a few years ago, and when I was finishing up, I was struck with the choice of either try and make it in academia or stick around the Cambridge area and try and find a job. And this choice was complicated by the fact that I had a partner that I had just proposed to, and we've since gotten married, and I wanted to be with her, be around her, that sort of thing. And it was unfair to ask her to move across the country. And so when I was really outlining the options that I had academically, one was to go and work for quote unquote a kingmaker to try and land an academic post, and the other was try and find a position around here. And it took a lot of soul searching, probably about a year of soul searching, and I realized obviously that the right thing for me to do was to try and find an academic post. And I made that choice specifically because as I considered what I enjoyed about academia, it was really centered around two things. One, I enjoyed mentoring, and the other bit was I enjoyed solving incredibly hard open-ended problems. And I liked solving those problems by finding a solution method that involved both strong computational aspects and mathematical aspects. So I reflected on the skills that I had obtained as a PhD student, and I'd done a lot of supercomputing work and these sorts of things, and realized, actually there's a lot of need for supercomputing in industry, and there's a lot of need for people that have pretty decent training in statistical mechanics and the types of physics that I'd learned. And one of those fields was machine learning. It also didn't hurt that there's like, I don't know, a 5,000 or 6,000 job role deficit in machine learning. And so the jobs were fairly easy to find, fairly high paying, and they were willing to accept that it would take me a minute to learn on the job. And so I took my first job, and I was completely honest with my employer. I explained, I know very little proper machine learning, but I know a lot of computer science and I know a lot of physics, and I can use these as a Rosetta Stone to probably figure it out. And anyway, a PhD taught me to think on my feet. And fortunately, my first employer said, yeah, that's probably true because he also had a PhD. And using those skills, as the other panelists have pointed out, I was able to quickly figure out what was going on. As it turns out, machine learning uses a lot of the same mathematical methods that I had learned in physics with just different names. And so very quickly, I found that I was in a field that felt at home and I enjoyed it. But more than that, I was also able to make a choice that ended up working pretty well for my family. This ultimately meant that I was able to transition to a principal scientist role at a new startup where I'm running my own team, and I've hired my own employees, and I'm mentoring them and training them in how I'm thinking about the projects that I'm working on. And so I'm getting a lot of the group leader role and group leader activities that most people tend to associate with being in academia, with that actually being in academia. And so I have sort of the best of both worlds. There's also a lot of nice day-to-day aspects to the job that I've taken and to the way that I've found to structure my team. So, for example, we read what comes out in the archive every day to keep up to date with what's out there. And so I still read and keep up to date with the scientific literature. And we're currently preparing a paper to submit to some major AI conferences so that we can contribute back to that scientific process that's helped us out so much. And that's been really a deeply rewarding project. And it's so far the career's been deeply rewarding, and I think I'm pretty happy with the choice that I made. It allowed me to find the trade-off between the work-life balance and the parts of the job that I actually enjoyed, while still maintaining my relationship and duty with my family. I would definitely do it again. And for someone who is sort of stuck in a situation like mine, I would say, one, you're not actually stuck. You have a ton of great opportunities, and two, it's okay to leave academia. Becoming a professor isn't the end all be all, and you've got a lot of great opportunities out there for you.
Great, thank you very much. Dr. Reichel?
Hi, everybody. So I originally joined grad school in 2011 with the full intention of becoming a physicist in academia. But like some of the other speakers, when the harsh reality of actually trying to find a job sank in about second to last year of graduate school, I started to sort of reassess what my interests were and what I was capable of doing. And basically came to the conclusion that what really excited me during grad school was sort of the everyday activity of doing physics as opposed to physics itself. So computer programming, problem solving, etc. And those are the kinds of things that I felt I could, pursue an industry outside of academia. Of course, another reason why I decided to think about industry is sort of did a cost-benefit analysis between pursuing a postdoc for 3 to 5 years versus immediately starting my career. And quite frankly, it seemed clear to me that the benefits outweighed the cost of and the sacrifice of doing a postdoc. I just simply didn't love physics enough to postpone starting my career for another 3 to 5 years. And then another thing is that I really wanted to work as part of a larger team. I'm a theoretical physicist, or I was, and a lot of the work is kind of done in isolation or working with really small groups. I wanted to collaborate with larger groups and have more exposure to people with different variety of backgrounds, and I felt industry could provide me that. Once I sort of decided that I wanted to go into industry, the next question obviously is, which industry? And fortunately, with the physics degree, there's a lot of variety of things you can do. I was sort of throughout graduate school vaguely aware that physicists would sometimes go into finance. So that's sort of where I started. And basically, over the last year and a half of graduate school, I just immersed myself in mathematical finance, reading all the textbooks I could, reaching out to people who had pursued that work, and really trying to get a sense of whether my skill set fit that job and whether it was something that was going to be intellectually stimulating for me. And fortunately, it seemed like that was the case. Another fortunate thing is that I had a close friend in my research group who had applied to the big banks about a year before me, so I could kind of use him as a guinea pig to see if I was well prepared for the interviews and whether it was going to be something that I could actually do. In my 6-year graduate school, I applied to several of the big banks and was offered a position at Wells Fargo, which I took primarily because Wells Fargo offered this sort of unique program that allowed me to rotate in different quant positions within the bank for my first year. I tried to do as much research as I could to figure out what the job was going to be like, but there's nothing like actually doing the job. This program at Wells Fargo offered me that opportunity to kind of try out a lot of different positions. So I've been at Wells Fargo for 2 years now, and my job there is basically to develop mathematical models and implement them to price and assess the risk of complex financial instruments. Certainly on the job, I've learned numerous technical things that I had never picked up in physics graduate school, things about regulatory rules and economics and different kind of financial instruments, all that fun stuff. But more broadly speaking, one of the main things I learned, and this is probably no surprise to some of you, but it was a little bit of a surprise to me, and I mean this in the best way, is that there are some really smart people who work in industry. When I was in academics, when I was in graduate school, I certainly held academics on a pedestal, which was a bit self-serving of me, but nonetheless, that was the case. And I was, surprised, very pleasantly surprised that there are some really smart people there, and I work with PhDs on an everyday basis. Even within a really large corporation like Wells Fargo, there's a lot of room for creative thinking. It still is a dynamic environment that you would expect in an academic role. You can still find that within a large corporation, believe it or not. And then another major thing that I learned, another big lesson, and I think Susanna mentioned this a little bit, communication skills are absolutely critical if you want to succeed in the industry. I'm sure regardless of where you go, coming from a scientific background, if you go into industry, part of your job surely will be to disseminate, technical things to people who just don't have the background. You'll have to explain complex mathematics to people who don't know calculus, for instance. And developing good communication skills while you're in grad school is absolutely invaluable. So just some friendly advice. Any opportunity you have to communicate to the public about your science, take advantage of those opportunities. Any opportunity you have to teach, I highly suggest doing that, even though it might distract from your research. I wish I had taught more in graduate school because that experience was absolutely important for me now, and it's carried over into my role in industry. Anyways, thank you so much for giving me the chance to speak to you today. I look forward to your questions.
Great, thank you very much. Now we'll move on to audience questions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Sandoval, and I am a 2018 Goldwater Scholar from the University of Florida. I'll be the one asking our speakers any questions you have today, so be sure to send in questions if you have them using the questions feature in GoToWebinar. My first question for our speakers is, what impact, if any, has winning the Goldwater Scholarship had on your careers looking back? And we can go in the order that's on the slide. So Dr. Bishop?
Sure. So I think the Goldwater was pretty special to me because of the timing, that it happens at this sort of unique and pivotal time in your undergraduate career. So at that point, I had just recently switched into majoring in mathematics from having been focused on English and writing. And I didn't really view myself yet as a scientist. I kind of felt like an outside observer in the sort of mathematics community. And in the particular place where I was at Princeton, the mathematics community is great, but it's also like very isolating and very insular, and doesn't really think of itself as part of a larger interconnected community of scientists. It more thinks of itself as a sort of pure math program. And so I think for me, at least as an internal framing of sort of being welcomed into this community of scientists, gave me the confidence to sort of think of myself that way. And it's definitely something that I've carried forward, that I've always thought of myself as a scientist who specializes in math as opposed to a mathematician.
Dr. Johns?
Yes. So for me, I got this scholarship when I was at St. Francis University. It's a small school in Pennsylvania. And I'm the only one who has received this scholarship at that school. So for me, this was a bit of an honor to be the one selected as an undergrad. And it really kind of solidified in my mind that, yeah, I can probably do research in graduate school. It's something that I am capable of. I'm capable of coming up with good research ideas, and people have the confidence in me that I would be able to do it. And I think that just kind of helped out. And even in graduate school, there are times when you're there and the students around you are also all very smart, and sometimes it can feel like it's a very different environment, that there are so many smart people here. Maybe you're no longer the absolute top of the class like you may have been in undergrad, but it still serves as kind of a reassurance that you're able to do this kind of thing, that you are a scientist, and that you can contribute.
Thanks. Dr. Leahy?
I agree a lot with what Paul and Allison just went through, and I agree in terms of how it affected me as well. So the timing of the Goldwater was really helpful to me, because I was on a fine line balancing between going down a history path versus biology and science more widely. And so getting the Goldwater did confirm for me that I had some valid scientific ideas, that there was potential for me for a career in science. Maybe going to graduate school wasn't such a crazy idea. It also was invaluable in the sense that success feeds on success. So off the back of getting the Goldwater, I was also able to get other grants and fellowships. The fact that I ended up in Australia is because I got a fellowship, and they looked at my successful track record, and one of those things had been getting the Goldwater. And that's put me on a completely different life path than I would have if I didn't get the Goldwater. So very much the timing of it, being in science and kind of reaffirming my role in science. And then as Paul mentioned, down the track, when you're feeling pretty insecure in graduate school because you've gone from being a big fish in a little pond to an average sized fish in a pretty massive pond full of very intelligent people. When you're feeling pretty insecure, every once in a while you can go, somebody somewhere thinks I'm intelligent. This makes me feel better. So yes, it was very valuable to me to get the Goldwater.
Awesome, thank you. Dr. Markovich?
Yeah, so basically my answer falls in line with what everybody else has said. I would add that I came from a large but unknown university in the University of Houston. Matt did as well. And having the Goldwater on my resume helped show that it was an external marker of quality, because I was in a 9-10 person physics program, And so it's fairly unimpressive to be able to say that I got A's in all of my physics courses when I was, in a 9 or 10 person physics program. But to have the Goldwater say, but this person is also good on this external metric, helped me get into not only the graduate programs I got into, but it also helped me win the NSF fellowship that allowed me to pursue the research that I wanted to pursue.
Thank you. And Dr. Reichel?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with pretty much what everyone else has said. It's definitely a boon to your resume. In fact, I think 2 of the 3 reviewers from an NSF fellowship explicitly mentioned the Goldwater scholarship as being impressive. Another thing I could add is I think just the process of putting together a Goldwater application is a really useful experience for applying for graduate school, for applying for other fellowships, even for applying for grants, as a research scientist or research scientist in training in graduate school. Yeah.
Thank you. So my next question for you all is, what would you guys say to any scholars who are on the fence or maybe unsure about leaving academic research? It could be all they know, really, for a different career path. Dr. Bishop?
Thanks. Yeah, I would say that sort of any decision you're making about this, at least the way I made the decision to go to grad school, was in a very non-decision kind of way. It just seemed like what people like me on that path would do. And I got a lot out of it. I learned very transferable sort of problem solving skills, as many people have mentioned, this ability to just sort of learn how to learn and to get deep into something and understand it quickly and connect it to other things you know. So it's hard to imagine kind of what would have happened on the alternate path where I didn't go to grad school. But I didn't make the decision in the mindful way of that I want to get these particular skills or these transferable skills. I was just kind of floating along the path. And I think there's definitely a danger in just continuing to do that and just doing the thing that's safe and not being mindful about your goals for what you're doing. So when I made the decision to sort of leave the academic path and go into industry, it was an interesting process because I did it at a much farther point than most people get to before quitting. I had sort of gotten that coveted tenure track assistant professorship in a prestigious place. And when I sort of felt restless and thought about leaving because I wanted to be sort of closer to the sort of practice of the kind of computer science problems I was working on, I talked to a lot of different academics about it and got, the whole range of answers. But one thing that was interesting was that a lot of people at my peers at the same phase as me of assistant professorship thought I was completely insane. They're like, why would you not just keep your head down for 4 more years and get tenure at Columbia? Like, that's crazy. Like, you should absolutely just stay put. Like, what are you even thinking? And because from their perspective, looking at how much they'd put in to get to this point, it was crazy to kind of think about throwing it away. But a lot of the older faculty members I talked to who'd been tenured and in academic research for 20 years, almost without exception, they all said, I wish I had done what you're thinking of doing. I wish I had gone into industry and learned more about what was happening on the ground in my area so that I could have used, because now I wonder, like, what would have been if I could have designed my research in a more sort of directly informed from practice way. So everybody was kind of, the grass is greener on the other side, which the good news about that is whatever you're on the fence about doing, like, there isn't a good choice and a bad choice. Like, you're going to learn something interesting from what you do. So you should follow when you're learning. And similarly, I think the decision of sort of when to leave a postdoc or when to leave grad school and go on to the next phase, it's when you're not learning anything new anymore. So I sort of insisted on graduating from my PhD a little earlier than my advisor sort of wanted me to, because I felt like I had kind of reached this point in my research where I had learned a certain tool set and I was just applying it. And I knew kind of how to apply it, and we would pick a new application and apply the same kind of strategy and write a paper. And at that point, I wasn't learning anything new. And so as long as at every stage in your career, you're sort of learning something new, I think it doesn't really matter ultimately whether it's in academia or in industry.
Fantastic. Dr. Johns?
Yeah, I think for someone who's considering alternative career paths, it's worthwhile to to get out there and try to experience what those career paths may be like. So things like informational interviews of just finding people and talking about their careers and seeing what it's like. I think that can be really helpful. I know for me in graduate school, I did some volunteer interning with the Office of Technology Transfer just to see what it was like working in a technology transfer patent law type of setting. Turns out that's not something I want to do, which is okay. And there's great resources to be able to connect with people. Obviously, LinkedIn can help, but one that people might not think of is actually Twitter. It's very helpful in connecting academics. You don't necessarily think of it right away, but at least in chemistry, there's an account called ChemJobber, and the person who runs that account is anonymous, but he posts all about chemistry jobs and what people can do with chemistry, and it can connect with people with hashtags specific to your academic path. So like hashtag real-time-chem will help you solve laboratory research problems, or you can do hashtag chemjobs or hashtag alt-chemjobs and just kind of connect with the people there. And you can end up meeting people there or meeting people in LinkedIn or in person at networking events, and just kind of getting a feel for what it is that you want to do. I think that's helpful.
Thank you, Dr. Johns. Dr. Leahy?
Things that I would say to people who are considering a move to academia, one is cold, hard cost-benefit analysis. So really putting into different columns, what am I going to get from staying in academia? What am I going to get from a career in various different pathways in a different column for each one? Something very explicit for me works, but there's also intangibles. So, and trying to add those to an explicit cost-benefit analysis can be hard, but you can do it. I've done it. Things like being able to have a 9-to-5 job and the ability to go home, and you can still be thinking about it, but your career doesn't depend on your ability to just overnight come up with a solution and get that grant in tomorrow, because otherwise you won't have funding and you'll lose half your staff. So the intangible there is that peace of mind of knowing that you'll still have a job, you're still high performing. So adding those sorts of things I found very helpful. And being realistic about the sacrifices that you're willing to make, and being realistic about what your personal goals are. There's nothing shameful about wanting to have a house and get started paying a mortgage on it. And that's something that I wasn't able to do on an academic salary. And I really appreciate having a house. It's really lovely. So there's sacrifices there. I wasn't willing to have my career at the expense of my partner's career. And that's something that we ended up making as a decision together. But again, all of that goes into that cost-benefit analysis, all those different columns. And there's no shame in any particular path. A friend of mine did a chemistry PhD, and she had a bit of a midlife crisis through her postdoc, and now she runs a bakery, and she's very happy. And who cares? She's on a path that she enjoys.
Yes, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I
much.
have much to add to that, because I think everybody has done a great job answering.
Okay, Dr. Reichel, anything to add before we move on?
No, I mean, just, sort of to reiterate, definitely recommend reaching out to as many people as you can in the industries that you're thinking about. It helps to get as many data points as possible and to actually get personal feedback from people. And then another thing I would just caution, take what your advisors tells you with a grain of salt. Obviously, the people who are working in academia have a bias, and it's definitely supplement their advice with advice from people who are actually working outside of academia.
Awesome, thank you all. So actually, we've gotten 2 questions on this topic. A lot of people want to know, how important is it to get your PhD if you already kind of know or think that you want to go into industry rather than academic research? Dr. Bishop?
Sure. Well, it kind of depends upon your field and what you want to do, but at least in sort of computer science, it's incredibly common for people to go work in industry out of undergrad for a year or 2 and decide then to just stay in industry, even if they had been thinking about doing a PhD, or then decide to go back and do a PhD. So at least in sort of fields like computer science, where there's a lot of demand for industry entry-level roles, I think it would make, if you think you know what you want to do in industry, it would make total sense to go and do it for a year, and you don't have to think of this as a fork that you've made that you can never go back. A lot of people go back to grad school if they decide that either a PhD would be helpful to their sort of role in industry, or they change their mind about being in industry academia. It sort of makes them more purposeful and informed graduate students, and it also can make the graduate student life a little softer if you've gone and experienced industry and have a little bit of an income built up. So you don't have to think about it as one or the other. But if you have already an idea of what you would want to do in industry, I would say go do it for a little while, and you don't have to view it as closing that door to research.
Awesome. Dr. Johns?
Yeah, absolutely. If you know what you want to do in industry and it doesn't require a PhD, then you probably don't need to go for it right away unless you really want that degree. And it is possible to go back to graduate school later on. A little bit of my story. I started graduate school in 2007, and for various reasons, I left at the end of 2008 and taught for a little while and did some other things, and then eventually went back to graduate school. So it is a possibility to go back to graduate school later on. So if it is something that you want to do later on and not immediately, by all means, you can do that.
Dr. Leahy?
I guess it would depend on at what stage in their career somebody is asking this question for me. If a PhD student 1 to 2 years from completion was asking this of me, I would suggest just sticking it through and finishing it, because you're so close to that finish line that once you get over that last hurdle and you submit and you have the PhD, you have that credibility of a finished degree, and no one can take those few letters away from you. That's done and dusted. However, if you're earlier on in your grad school career, or you're later on and you're just having a meltdown, that the mental cost of grad school is too high, and it is for a lot of people, then step out of grad school. There's no worries. As the other panelists have said, you can always come back to it later if it's something that you really want to do, and you'll come back with more focus. And also, if you decide grad school isn't for you, you can always find other ways to demonstrate your competence, because the years that you're not in grad school can be years that you're gaining actual tangible experience in X, Y, and Z skill sets. And those are just as real as having a few letters after your name.
Thank you. Dr. Markovich, anything to add?
Yeah, so I would say if you are in the middle of your PhD and you're considering leaving, it's worth definitely having that conversation with your advisor. Your advisor may end up working with you to find a way to have some projects that finish quite a bit more quickly, or are a little bit more of a sure thing, but maybe a little bit less impressive, so that you're positioned more easily to get a PhD that would be impressive for industry, but may not position you as well for the academic job market. There's certainly no shame in that. To be completely frank, that's part of what I did. and it worked out perfectly fine. It's part of how I did a 4.5-year PhD, and it turned out just fine. I would also say that there's also no shame in getting a vanity PhD, which is part of what I did. I realized fairly early on that I was probably not going to go into a job that necessarily required a PhD, although getting that job would be easier with a PhD. But I got the PhD anyway, partially out of vanity and partially because I just enjoyed what I was doing. And there was no reason, if you're enjoying what you're doing and learning a lot, to not continue on that path.
Thank you. And Dr. Reichel?
I don't think I have anything to add. Thanks.
All right. So we're about getting close to the time. So this will probably be the last question. But one question that was asked by the audience was that it seems that a lot of the times industry jobs are seen as focused a lot on revenue. That might be a misconception. And if so, can you dispel that misconception and maybe any other misconceptions people might have about jobs in industry? Dr. Bishop?
Yeah, I mean, I think on Wall Street, that is pretty true for the most part, at least in finance, which is one large part of why I really didn't see myself in finance, and I'm only working in sort of roles that are not exactly that. And I think though, whatever you do, you know, there's good incentives and there's bad incentives set up along every career path, and the most important thing is just to work with people that share your values. So for me, that's led to me being extremely selective about the kind of roles in industry that I will consider, and more specifically, the kind of people that I will work for. So I only work for and with people who, you know, we need to keep the bottom line and be able to pay the bills, but we have a mission that's independent of that. And that cuts out a lot of industry roles for me as a possibility, but I haven't had too hard a time finding that within industry.
Thank you. Dr. Johns?
Yeah, so for me, I'm at a government-run facility, so there is no revenue here, essentially. That our mission is basically to serve the Navy, to develop research and technology that can advance science in general. And some of these, the research projects are for military applications. NRL doesn't do any weapons development or anything, but yeah, our mission is not revenue based at all. So either just broad scientific merit in general, or specific applications in mind.
Thanks. Dr. Leahy?
So similar to Paul there, I didn't go into a career track that was funding focused. So I've worked in NGOs where, you know, you're actually making people's lives better and you're having a real noticeable impact on their lives, and that's deeply rewarding. You know, once you climb down from the ivory tower, you can affect real change on the ground, which I couldn't do from academia. And I find that really rewarding on a very personal, very human level. Yeah, I'm affecting real change on the ground in government. We're doing science specifically to manage fisheries, and we're taking species. As an academic, I could say, oh, this is species conservation, oh, this is, I could highlight problems in academia, but as a government science, I can actually work on fixing them. And I really like being on that side of the equation.
Thanks. Dr. Markovich?
Yeah, I think the reality of my job is that I am revenue focused at some point, which means that my bias is more towards choosing technologies and implementations of things that work first and foremost, and not necessarily privileging novelty in the research that I do or the implementations that I work on. I would also argue that this is a bit of a false dichotomy. Sure, I focus on revenue, but when I was an academician, I focused a lot on my citation count and all of that. And if I were to go and work for a given kingmaker in my field, one of the things that he really pushes his postdocs to do is to watch the archive every day and really pester people when they don't cite the papers that they published. And that's just as much revenue focus as anything else. It's just in a currency that's imaginary that gets you jobs instead of something that you can buy a house with.
Thanks. And Dr. Reichel, anything to add?
Yeah, so I, work for a giant corporation. Obviously, revenue is fundamental to the goal of corporation. But in my everyday working environment, well, first of all, I work in a risk management role at the bank. So if anything, we're actually keeping a cap on revenue. And then, just my everyday experience, it's never really on my mind. I mean, what's driving the work is just solving problems that come up. Now, to second what Thomas says, it's true in industry, you have to work, with technology that, the end goal is to get it to work, to put it through into production, which is a little bit distinct from academia where, you have sort of the freedom to pursue things that are at the cutting, the absolute cutting edge, or that are, being done purely for novelty so that you can publish papers. But yeah, I mean, revenue generation is just never something that really on an everyday level impacts my thought process or my work. And I feel like if it did, I just wouldn't last long. What really motivates me is just interesting problems, intellectual stimulation, working with people who I respect. And I get that even at Wells Fargo.
Thank you so much to all our speakers for giving us insight into alternative career paths, or as they like to call it, career paths. Unfortunately, we have come to the end of our webinar. I'm now going to pass the baton to my good friend Daniela, who will close us out.
Great. Hello, everyone, and thank you, Aaron. So I'm Daniele, and I'm a 2018 Goldwater Scholar from Boise State University. So yes, unfortunately, our time today has come to an end, but the conversation can still continue. We have created a channel on Slack called Alternative Careers, where you can continue to ask questions and further this discussion. I hope that all of you and all of our speakers will join us on the Slack channel today and in the coming days. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all of our speakers, Dr. Leahy, Dr. Johns, Dr. Reichel, Dr. Bishop, and Dr. Markovich. We truly appreciate the time, insights, and experiences that you have shared with us. Many of us younger scholars have a long career ahead of us, and your advice is invaluable as we consider the many paths that we can take. I would also like to thank everyone who made this event possible, Dr. Matea, Aaron, Matt, and everyone else who helped us on the Goldwater Council. Thank you as well to Laura and Linda from Scholarship America. And finally, thank you to everyone who attended this webinar. We want to make the Goldwater community a place where Goldwater scholars can grow and learn from each other, as well as those who are more experienced. This webinar has definitely furthered our goal, and I'm happy to share that we have more webinars on a variety of topics planned for the future. So keep an eye out on the Slack. Thank you again to everyone, and I hope to see you all on our Slack channel, Alternative Careers. Have a great evening.